As more horrific details come out about the mass shooting on Tuesday at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, where 19 children and two teachers were killed, we are learning that the majority of Republican senators and the Republican governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, continue to oppose any kind of gun safety legislation, citing concerns about infringing on the rights of gun owners. In light of this and the other 200 plus mass shootings that have occurred this year in the United States, does their obstinate approach to gun safety legislation give Democrats an opportunity to sweep this year's midterms? Experts weigh in, all coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
Texas has had 8 mass shootings in the last 13 years, and during this period, lawmakers in Texas loosened, not tightened, the restrictions on carrying firearms, making it easier for shooters like the 18-year-old man that killed 19 children and two teachers at Robb Elementary. These laws made it easier for that shooter to buy multiple assault weapons and hundreds of rounds of ammunition on his 18th birthday. These Texas lawmakers have bought into the theory that the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Now, we know this is a fallacious argument because the shooter in Texas and the shooter at the grocery store in Buffalo, they both faced armed security, armed law enforcement, and nothing stopped either of those shooters from committing mass murders. Now, Greg Abbott, despite this theory, is up for re-election a third time. And he faces Beto O'Rourke again. This is Beto O'Rourke's second time trying to unseat Greg Abbott for the governorship in Texas. Before the shooting, Abbott was up by 12 points. Now, Abbott's approach and his obstinance on gun safety legislation is not unique to him. The New York Times reached out to all 50 Republican senators on Wednesday following the shooting, the majority of whom have opposed gun laws for years. They've banded together to block its consideration and even to block efforts to bring gun safety legislation to the Senate floor. But Republicans are out of step with the American people. Polls show an overwhelming majority of Americans support some restrictions on firearms. In some polls, 90% of Americans support universal background checks. But Republicans' fear of being primaried by an extremist on the right keeps them from even considering the most common sense gun safety legislation, leaving our children who attend schools, our parishioners that attend churches, shoppers in stores, leaving all of us vulnerable to being gunned down by the mass shooters that we've witnessed in the last couple of weeks. But what does all of this mean for Democrats and the rest of the country as we continue to vote in midterm elections? My first guest is Zainab Muhammad. She is a community organizer and hopes to make history as the first Black woman elected to the Minnesota State Senate. Good morning and welcome, Zainab.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you. I read your bio, so I know you're only 24 years old. You recently graduated from college in 2019, and you are running for elected office. You heeded that call that was made several years ago when we saw so many people saying young people and women and people of color need to run for office. So congratulations to you for heeding that call and jumping into this very important Senate race. How does it feel to be a candidate for such an important seat and to be possibly going to be one of the youngest members of this legislative body?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's a really critical, important year, and it's a really important election that I have decided to step up and run. And more importantly, I feel incredibly empowered by my community. I feel empowered by Black women just across the country who have asked me to run. And we've been running since December. It's been 6 months, and I am 25 now. But I'm really excited. I think it's going to be a really good year. I think we're currently in a Republican majority Senate, and hopefully we'll try to flip it to a Democratic majority.
What are you thinking in this moment? And thank you for correcting me on your age. You are
Last week.
well, happy belated birthday. But what are you thinking about this shooting and what it says about our country that an 18-year-old can walk into a gun store and legally purchase not one, but multiple assault weapons and hundreds of rounds of ammunition?
Yeah, I mean, you for me on a personal level, it impacts me because you you know what it feels like to send your kids to school, or for you, I had just gotten out of a school, to know that you could just be sitting in a classroom and be killed. All because people who are in power, who have the opportunity to change these laws, these policies, are choosing to look the other way for their own political power. I think it's disheartening to see adults watch children get killed in the middle of a daylight as their parents send them off to school. If you can't send your kids to school, like, what's next in this country? Like, where are we headed? What are we doing? And it almost feels like we've been saying this for years. Like, this is 27 school shootings in how long? And when is enough going to be enough? That's why it's important that we not just like push for, extreme policies on banning things like assault weapons, but like, we put limitations to these things to ensure that people can send their kids to school. People can go to the movie theaters. You can go to the mall and just feel safe and not wondering or overlooking from your side. You're on the side of your shoulder and wondering what's going to happen to you or your kids.
So, what we know is that the federal elected officials, those elected to the U.S. Congress, Zainab, as Republicans, those 50 Republicans, that they are not changing their minds. They made it very clear there's no amount of blood shed that's going to cause them to what they believe to be infringe on gun owners' constitutional rights. But we also see a lot of Republican state houses have very similar approaches to gun safety legislation. Obviously, states like Texas have very liberal laws, make it very easy for people to get guns, to carry guns. And you are in Minnesota, as you said, where there is a majority Republican, it's a Republican-run state legislature. In Minnesota, you guys don't have an assault weapon ban. So what are you thinking about how you move a state legislature like yours that is controlled by Republicans to take some action to make it more difficult for people, even in your own state, to purchase guns?
Yeah. Yeah. The Republicans across the country are really good at being organized and sticking to their message and not wanting to move regardless of what happens. They're good at that. We've seen them be organized and move extremely to the right, especially in recent years since Trump. Minnesota, you're right, does not have a ban on assault weapons. I am running on that. I am pushing for that. I know the Democrats are wanting to hopefully make this a policy, but you can't do it if you have a majority Republican Senate that not only is against it, but won't even come to the table to negotiate it. And so Minnesota, one of the biggest things that I think we've been struggling with here has been we have a majority in the House, but not in the Senate. And they don't even come to the table when it comes to negotiations. Like they just won't. And so how can you negotiate with essentially a brick wall if they're not willing to have a conversation with you? That's been one of the more difficult things that we're struggling with. And I know people across the state who are Democrats are running on banning assault weapons, putting stricter on background checks, and making sure that these things are safer for folks across the country.
So you just hit on a really important point, Zainab, and that's the Republicans, how consistent they remain on issues, even when they face extreme criticism, and how on message they stay. And Democrats often get criticized for not having a clear, concise message that resonates and not picking some core issues like whether it's abortion or gun safety or appointing judges to the federal bench. What do you think Democrats need to do, particularly in these midterms, in this moment, that would cause people to, find their messaging more attractive and motivate more to come out and vote? Because there are more people in this country that believe in banning assault weapons, universal background checks, red flag laws, all of the things that we're pushing for, but yet this minority of people are preventing the majority from having those kinds of laws. How do we craft a message that resonates better?
I think we talk about the issues head on. I don't think we shy away from it. I think we need to be more direct and talk about, Roe versus Wade potentially being overturned is not something that happened overnight. They've been organizing this for over 50 years. They've been working on this. And it's the same thing when it comes to these extreme gun laws that we want to overturn and change so that people can be safe. I think the Democrats need to face these issues head on. We need to talk about them directly. And more importantly, we need to educate people on what the extreme right is doing and how organized they are and how ready they are. We know midterms aren't easy for the Democrats. It's been in recent history, it's been that way. But I think this year is going to be difficult. It's going to be different. I really believe people are going to have an understanding of if Roe versus Wade gets overturned, other things are going to be overturned. And that's going to be a difficult thing, not just for voters across the country, but for the Dems especially. And there needs to be a better and consistent messaging across the board. The same way that Republicans are doing it, whether you're state legislators or your federal people.
So you're 25, Zainab. How can the Democrats motivate people in your generation to turn out? Because we know that in presidential elections, there's a lot of attention focused on young voters. There's a lot of efforts to organize young voters, but we don't see that same level of consistency in many of the local races that happen throughout, non-presidential years. We don't see that same mobilization and focus on young voters in midterm years. How do we get young voters out? Because again, we know that most young voters are, in alignment, in agreement with candidates that want more gun safety legislation, that want women to have freedom over their reproductive rights. But a lot of young voters feel apathetic. They say it doesn't matter. My vote doesn't matter because it doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat, a black person, white person, brown person. All politicians are horrible. So how do we get young voters to recognize that it does matter?
Yeah. I was that person at one point where I giving up, but I was like in college, like, who cares about this? I think reality is we need to better engage young people by not just talking to them during a presidential year, but when you have when you have a local election, whether it's your city council, your school board, because those things affect them just as much as a presidential race. But I don't think we engage young people enough. I don't think we engage young people on issues that really matter to them, whether it's education issues or public safety or reproductive rights. We just don't engage young people enough, and that's a reality. I think my race is going to have a really important perspective in Minnesota. I know that just in my campaign, it's been young folks who've showed up since December who door knock. We have people from like different colleges that reach out who are like, I want to come work for you. I want to come volunteer for you. That's what it's about. It's about teaching them how to organize, engaging them, and having them realize the power that they have in this country, not just in a presidential election, but in their local elections as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I hope that that's happening nationwide, that it's not just happening in your Senate race, although I'm glad to hear that it is. So, Zainab, yesterday was the second anniversary of the murder of George Floyd by those Minneapolis police officers. We saw President Biden sign an executive order in the White House yesterday. The Floyd family was there. I think Breonna Taylor's family was there, a lot of civil rights leaders. And this was an executive order that was signed because we could not get federal legislation passed, police legislation passed. The George Floyd and Policing Act was voted on in the House, but then not passed in the Senate. And so the president was left with the only option he had was to move by executive order. And some people say the executive order is, kind of window dressing. It only impacts 100 federal law enforcement officers. It does set some national standards. It bans no-knock warrants. And it does create a mandate for officers to intervene when other officers are engaged in misconduct. But what's happening where you are around George Floyd? Because it feels like we had this national conversation after George Floyd about race and its racial reckoning. And even the president acknowledged that it's waning, that it seems to be, fading from the public conscious. Is that happening in Minneapolis as well, where you are?
Yeah. Where George Floyd was murdered, it's the neighboring district to my district. I could walk there from my house. a lot has changed and nothing has changed at the same time. That's the reality that we're in. I don't think not enough measurements on accountability on law enforcement has been passed in the state of Minnesota. And in Minneapolis, we just had the Minnesota Department of Human Rights release their investigation findings onto the Minneapolis Police Department. If you have time to read that. It's about 71 pages, and it's horrifying to read what has come out of it. I think that we have an opportunity to correct it. But if we take longer time than we've already, and it's been 2 years and a lot has changed, I think George Floyd should be the reason why this country changed, and people have different perspectives on what Black people have been saying for decades about their interactions with law enforcement. And so not a lot has changed, but I can say that people recognize that people are going to continue to be organized to show up and say, we need something to change and we can't continue to live like this.
So I know you are running in a safe Democratic district. There was a Democratic Latina woman who was the first Latinx woman to win in that district. And I guess she won by about 70% when she last ran. Although your district is predominantly a white district, it's heavily Democratic. What would you say to those Democrats who are running in districts where they don't enjoy, 70% of the, Democratic votes, and they've got to appeal to more moderate Dems, independents, and even some Republicans to win? Do you think they can run on the same platform and have the same messaging that you have running in such a heavily Democratic district?
Yeah, I think the message is clear. It's that things have to change. We can't continue to operate as business as usual. And that means when it comes to police accountability, we can talk about that in areas that are not predominantly Democratic or seats that we're trying to flip, because people across the state have come together for a year and a half organizing around George Floyd, or organizing around police accountability and wanting reforms to be passed. But that doesn't mean that we look away and say we don't want safe communities. I think, too, we can talk about safety, we can talk about crime, but we also need to talk about accountability as well. And I think that's going to shape the perspective of the districts that we're trying to flip this year.
Well, good luck to you, Zainab. Again, congratulations on not just sitting around griping and complaining, but just jumping right in, right after college, taking the leap of becoming an elected official. And you are obviously super bright and intelligent, and I think the kind of leader that we need. And hopefully this is just the beginning. Maybe we'll see you in a congressional seat or a Senate seat or something, leading, not just your state, but leading in the country. So again, congratulations. And we'll be watching your race. And cheering you on to victory in November.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you for having me today. It was really nice meeting all of you.
Absolutely. All right. We're talking about messaging. And when we talk about political messaging, we have to talk to Richard Green. He is an extraordinaire, our political communication strategist extraordinaire. That's what I wanted to say. And he's also the author of Words That Shook the World. Good morning, Richard. I hear you are in some incredibly exotic country again.
Well, I'm actually in Davos, Switzerland, where all the people all the big heavy hitters who are trying to fight climate change fly in on their private jets.
Okay, well, that's a whole nother show. But okay, Richard, you're just trying to irritate me before we start talking. Okay.
No, there's a lot of very cool people that are very, very dedicated, and there are a lot of problems to be solved. So
we're glad you're there, because we know you're a voice of reason, but you've seen the tragedy. You've seen the news of Uvalde, Texas. Oh my God, it's just been horrific listening to the accounts of how horrible. We're hearing accounts that police officers confronted, or armed people, I don't know if they're police or some law enforcement, confronted this shooter, followed him. He was allowed into the school. They were outside, some accounts say, while they could hear the kids crying as they were being massacred, parents outside begging the police to go in. A lot of murkiness about the timeline, why they waited so long. SWAT's called. Some people say it was 40 minutes before they enter, that this gunman is barricaded in there with those kids. But yet, Abbott says, and the Republicans say, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is to give a gun to a good guy. What are we missing? what's where are we, Richard? Where a country will allow 14 kids to be ripped apart, literally, and that's the response.
Can I tell you how shocked and horrified everyone that I speak to in Europe is about two things that are about to become the brand of America, and that is the loss of reproductive rights for women is horrifying and shocking. They go, how can a great country like America go back 50 years? How are you letting that happen? And I have an answer for that. And then, of course, with the guns and the fact that an 18-year-old can walk into a Walmart or whatever and buy these guns is beyond the comprehension of most of the rest of the world. And so the answer, I believe, is, and you'll know, you know me, I try to make things as simple as possible. To some extent, obviously, we have a mental health crisis. We have a cultural fetish with guns and a cohort of the American people that associates guns with the core human need of freedom, which it's not, right? And I tell people, and they say it's in the Second Amendment, and I say, you know what? Yes, I'm totally fine with you having a musket. You go get a musket. But AR-15s are not in the frickin' Constitution. But the simple messaging, and I've been sharing this, and Nancy Pelosi finally started talking about this, is that we are only 2 United States senators away from passing tremendously significant gun violence prevention legislation. We are 2 United States senators away from restoring reproductive rights and codifying Roe v. Wade. We are 2 United States senators away from really seriously and historically taking on climate change legislation and passing it. And so I think to take this horror and this upset and this frustration, and if we could get low propensity voters, young people, people of color, and to actually go out and vote for those issues and for, of course, police reform, we can accomplish everything. The Republicans, I'm going to say something very definitively. The Republicans don't have a chance. Everyone says they're going to win. They don't have a chance. If we could get youth voting and minority voting up even 25%, over what is incredibly low numbers. For example, 18 to 24-year-olds in the last midterms, I was like, oh, they voted so big in the midterms because of David Hogg and the March for Our Lives and the whole thing about guns in 2018. They went from 21% voting. These are horrifying statistics. 21% voting in 2014 midterms to 31% in the 2018 midterms, while old white people like me, not like me, who vote differently than me, but old white people vote 60, 65, 70%. We can't move forward unless and until young people vote at even close to the levels of older people. And the way to get them to vote is to have a conversation with them about civics. We need 270 people to change the laws. We only have 268. Re-elect your Democratic congressman and vote for every Democrat who's running for Senate. And if we elect 2 out of the 20 from the 20 Republican seats, we're good.
Okay, Richard, help me understand, because you're assuming we do away with the filibuster, right? Is that your math calculation?
Now, here's the magic of this. The reason I can say that with great certainty is that we have every one of the 50 Democratic senators, except for 2, who are willing to create carve-outs for these incredibly important issues that Mitch McConnell and the Republicans are blocking. We have 48. We do not have Kirsten Sinema for inexplicable reasons. She is the most confounding, perhaps stupidest politician I've ever studied in my life. And then Joe Manchin, who has this idealistic, naive idea that at some point in some distant universe, we're going to get 10 Republicans who are going to join with Democrats on these issues. We're not going to get any. We're at 0, and he thinks we can have 10. So because Sinema and Manchin are not willing to vote to create a carve-out, we don't need to wipe out the filibuster. We just need to have a carve-out. Because they're not willing to do it, we're only at 48. We need 49 and 50, just 2 more, and then Kamala Harris drives down from the White House and she breaks the tie, and we create instantly carve-outs on all of these issues, including lots of gun violence prevention legislation, and it's done. And Joe Biden signs it. If we don't get these 2 more Democratic senators and create a carve-out while we have a Democratic president, and we lose the White House to Ron DeSantis, who I am predicting will be the next president, we've talked about that at this point, we've now lost 2 years plus another 4 years. And then if they get reelected, another 4 years, that's 10 years. Or could be we even elect a Democrat in 2024, Joe Biden, Kamala, whoever, but we lose 1 House of Congress. We lose 1 senator in a 50-50 Senate, and now Mitch McConnell is the majority leader, and we're never even going to get these bills brought up for the next 2 years or 4 years or 6 years or 8 years. So I'm incredibly optimistic because I've done some preliminary polling with non-voters, young, low propensity voters, and I say, what's your enthusiasm to vote? And they'll go 1, 2, 3, 4 on a scale of 10. I then explain that we are just 2. I said, what do you care about? And they say climate or choice or gun violence prevention or police reform. And I say, we are 2 votes away. All you have to do is vote for the Democrats for House, for Congress, and 2 more amongst your friends. Let's crowdsource 2 more out of 20, Tim Ryan, John Fetterman, Sherry Beasley in North Carolina, and we're done. And they go, really? And I say, really? And then I say, what's your enthusiasm to vote then? And they go, oh, 7, 8, 9, 10. So anyway.
You're making it seem really simple, Richard, which I hope it is that simple, because when
I wouldn't lie to you, Areva. I would never lie to you.
I'm excited because when you say that, it makes so much sense. It's just so logical and it seems so doable. But then you look at what's happening, and let me give you an example. So yesterday, as you probably saw, when Abbott and his minions were giving their press conference, in walks Beto, he's pointing his finger. And so the headlines come out that Beto, that confronting of Abbott, maybe just cost him the election. Now I say, wait a minute, Democrats, you say that Dems are too wimpy. And so when he does something that shows, some passion and some whatever, I think you would like this because you like that kind of strong bravado. We've talked about that. And then it comes out with a headline that says it's going to cost him the election. So I say, are Democrats just schizophrenic, or what's going on here? You want strong candidates, and then when they act what is defined, not my definition, but definition of strong, you say, oh, I'm not going to vote for you because that was rude. That was poor timing.
So, we have to be adults. We have to grow up in this country. Are you going to be affected in terms of how you vote by someone's social etiquette, right? Certainly didn't seem to bother Republicans when Donald Trump did a million different things that were more obnoxious and disgusting, not to mention sexually assaulting 24 women or more. Are you going to vote based on that? Or are you going to vote because you actually want a governor of the state of Texas who's going to veto voting restrictions on Black and brown people, who's going to pass reproductive restrictions into the state of Texas that are even worse than they currently are, who's going to do 0 for the next 4 years about climate change? I mean, we have to focus on issues. Here's a quick analogy. When you're at midnight, your toilet explodes, right? And you go, oh my God, I need to fix this toilet, right? And you call a plumber, and the plumber comes in and they fix the toilet. You don't care how ugly, attractive, overweight, or disgusting or smelly that plumber is. You just want the job done. That's how we need to think about politicians. I don't care who you are. How are you going to vote? I don't care who you are. What legislation are you going to introduce? I don't care who you are. What legislation as governor or president are you going to sign? Boom, done.
I know, and I'm with you on that. And I was upset with those people. And then I said, well, they're probably closeted Republicans anyhow, right? All of these independents that say they're independent. And we know this is Texas, so let's deal with the race issue. We know a lot of white supremacists are in, states like Texas. They're in states like California too, so I don't want to say just Texas. But we know that those kinds of issues are also right underneath the surface. And I want to bring in Dr. Carter, because she's been waiting, Dr. Niambi Carter. She's a political scientist at Howard University. She also is the author of her book. Put it up for me, please, Rashad. Dr. Carter, are you with me? Welcome.
Yes, I'm here.
Back, Dr. Carter. I want to bring you in on this because we're going to get your book up. But Fetterman, Richard, Fetterman in Pennsylvania, right?
Yes.
So Fetterman won every district in Pennsylvania, and he is the nominee for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania. He's going to run against either Oz or McCormick whenever they finish fighting about that 1,200 vote split. But there's an issue about race with Fetterman, Richard. And Dr. Carter, I wanted to get your take on this. Fetterman in 2013 pulled a gun on an unarmed Black man he thought was doing something, but that he wasn't doing. The Black community in Philly has been trying to meet with Fetterman, the clergy, the NAACP. He's refused to date to meet with them. Says he's dealt with the issues in the past, blah, blah, blah. He got about 18% of the Black vote in that primary. And Black Twitter has been incensed over what they see as the Democratic Party trying to force them to elect a guy that will not deal with what they say is his race issues. So Niambi, you hear, or Dr. Carter, you hear Richard say, hold your nose and vote for the Democrat because we need two. But Black Twitter is saying, we may not be voting at all if y'all don't want us to deal with this race problem.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Black people, Black voters in particular, are often cited, right, to save things, right? So show up in Alabama and help Doug Jones. Show up in 2020, which they did in great numbers. Black turnout was over 60% in 2020. And elect Joe Biden so we don't have another term of Donald Trump. And what I tell people all the time is, when do white people have to do their part? A. And B, why do we always assume that Black voters have infinite wells of energy to offer, right? Because the question, people always say, well, you can just do this one thing and then we'll talk about your issues and then we'll get to your issues. And they never seem to come back around. And just like when we were talking about voting rights, I mean, the math of this makes sense, right? But this idea that it is, again, that Black people have to be the bigger people, right? That they have to do the work, or that Latinos have to do it, or Native Americans have to do it. And then we'll come back to the issues that you care about. And people are saying, actually, I do recognize that my vote is valuable currency. And I want you to treat me like an intelligent voter. And I want you to treat me like a strategic voter. And if you want my vote, then you need to make Fetterman come to heel. I don't think it's crazy.
All right, Richard, what do you say to that? Fetterman is like, I'm done. I already told you, my piece about this Black dude. I'm not talking about it because I won every district in Pennsylvania. And you Black people are going to get in line, or else you're going to have Dr. Oz as your senator. Oh, God.
So, Dr. Carter, I am very sympathetic to what you're saying. And you're right. The deck has been stacked, against people of color for a really long time, and it continues to be so. But I'm very transactional in my approach to politics. And that is, you're angry at John Fetterman and you're not going to vote, and you're going to let Mehmet Oz or David McCormick be the senator that prevents us from keeping the majority so we can pass voting rights and we can pass police reform and we can pass all the other things that you want. Great, go ahead, do that. But, again, there is no perfect politician. There is no perfect human. And that's why I gave the analogy of the plumber. It's like, We're hiring you to give Democrats the majority. We don't like you, which is my argument with people who didn't vote for Hillary. I said, really? Really? You're pissed off at Hillary and you don't like the DNC and how they treated Bernie, and you're going to let Donald Trump come on and appoint 1 or 2 or 3 Supreme Court justices that are going to change the America you live in for the next 30 years? Go ahead. But that doesn't seem logical to me.
But I guess, why doesn't the transaction work the other way? So Fetterman, you want to be the guy and we don't want something worse, then bite the bullet and go talk to these people. Nobody's asked for an apology. Nobody's asked for you to say that I shouldn't have done it or be, prostrate yourselves. People want a meeting. So why doesn't the transaction work in the other direction? Because he's the person asking for the votes. The voters have a right to either withhold or give. All of this makes sense. But when you're used to being the person who gets the short end of the stick, because people always make all kinds of promises. Well, once I get it, I'm going to do blank, blank, blank. And when those things don't materialize, you walk away feeling like the sucker. So in this moment where, quite frankly, this group of people might actually have more leverage, more power, the transaction can work in the other direction and say, Fetterman, just go talk to the people. Right? I mean, it was sort of like Bernie Sanders. You didn't even want to go talk to Jim Clyburn, right? Arguably one of the most powerful Democrats in the state. You actually need to win, but you decided to take yourself out of the running because you just said, I'm not going to get this person's vote, which is insulting for a number of reasons. And I think it's the same sort of racial politics at play here. It's the soft racism of white liberals who say, I'm good on everything else. I've had this one misstep. I'm not perfect, blah, blah, blah. But then everybody else should just say, but the other guy's worse. And I'm saying from when you're sitting back here, I can't really tell the difference between these different white guys. I know logically people are telling me my life will be worse or my life could potentially be slightly better, but I don't believe it because I've not seen it. And I can't believe in things unseen as of yet. And I think that transaction can work the other direction.
All right, Richard. So why isn't Biden saying to Fetterman, get your ass over there and talk to those black pastors? It's an hour meeting, dude. Just do it.
I don't know. Listen, when I coach my political clients, my business clients, it's all about being authentic and being honest and transparent. I don't know why John Fetterman is not doing it. Maybe he is trying to hide something, that if there's more exposure and there's meetings and there's more people who are involved, it's going to hurt his candidacy. I don't know. All I know is I really, 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 really want this flawed human being to be the next senator from Pennsylvania, and I don't want the other guys.
And I want him to be the senator too, and I want the Democratic governor in that state, because there's also a clown that's running for, the governor in that state as well from the Republican side. But I want that meeting.
Clown? Josh Shapiro is a clown?
No, not Josh, not the Democratic.
Oh, the Republican. The Republican, no.
Yes.
Yeah, beyond the clown.
I want Josh Shapiro to win, and I want Fetterman to win. But I want Fetterman to go to that meeting. I want Fetterman to talk to those pastors. I called a friend of mine who was going to run for Senate in Pennsylvania, and I said, look, can you broker a deal? Can you call your people? The dude just needs to have the meeting. He told me that there are people working on trying to get this meeting, whatever, set up. So they know it's a problem. They're not oblivious to the fact that it is a problem. And Richard, I wish people were as logical as you are and as you lay out voting in terms of numbers. But we know people are emotional. They respond to things that are visceral to them. And if their feelings get hurt, they literally may just sit at home and you and I will be like, oh my God, that is so stupid. I remember a woman talk about Hillary. Let me tell you this, Richard. She told me, I can't vote for Hillary because she doesn't look like somebody I could have tea with. And I was going to strangle her. I'm like, girl, you're not having tea with Hillary. That is, trust me, you will not be invited. But she was so serious about that. I see Katie's here. I got to bring her into this conversation. Katie Parrish, she is the founder of Red Wine and Blue, which is a community of suburban women who are actively engaging in electoral politics. And I always bring Katie on. Good to see you, my friend, when we want to check the pulse of white suburban women, because in states like Ohio, you mentioned Ryan, Richard. Katie, is Ryan going to beat J.D. Vance in Ohio, the Yale lawyer, become a producer and now biggest Trump supporter on the planet?
I think Tim Ryan has a good shot. I think that suburban women, and I think this goes for most folks across Ohio, we see through JD Vance and know that he is trying to pull a fast one on us. He wrote a book that a lot of people, I mean, gosh, I think several people mailed me Hillbilly Elegy when it came out, since there were so many Ohio references in there. But, you know, he hadn't done much that is consistent with that book since. And he has showed that ultimately it's these Silicon Valley billionaires who are pulling the strings here. And meanwhile, you've got Tim Ryan, who, you know, a lot of people make the comparison to Sherrod Brown, and he is working as hard as Sherrod Brown does and really connecting with the people across the state of Ohio. You know, in Ohio, to win, a Democrat has got to really turn out the base. And that means in urban areas and suburban areas. And they also have to expand. And then in the rural areas, they got to do less bad. That's how Sherrod Brown wins across Ohio. You know, I mean, rather than getting 18% in these red areas, he might win 30%. And so we've got to see if Tim Ryan is capable of doing all three things of those well. But suburban women do not like extremism. Americans don't like extremism, but suburban women in particular, we do not like this extremism. We do not like the idea of government mandated pregnancy. We do not like the idea of politicians who see our children massacred in schools and still say, we're not going to do anything about it. We don't like the idea of book banning and all this nonsense we're seeing happening in our schools either. And those are all the things that JD Vance stands for.
I love how you call that government mandated pregnancy. That is a very good way to frame this, because I think that resonates. I mean, people can, connect with that. Richard, Georgia, Trump got beat. His candidate for governor got beat. His candidate for Secretary of State got beat. But Herschel Walker, his candidate for U.S. Senate, is polling ahead of Senator Warnock. So on one hand, it looks like Trump's power over the party, at least in Georgia, may be waning. What do you make of that? We lost your audio, Richard.
Right. I'm in a hotel lobby, so there was some noise. I muted it. I think your previous guest hit the nail on the button, and that was Americans don't like extremism. And Trump's lie in Georgia and his attacks on Camp and Raffensperger was extreme. I mean, they don't like that. Herschel Walker, just like O.J. Simpson, right, is a hero, and people are willing to look past a sports hero's flaws for a while. Again, I love Raphael Warnock. I think he's an extraordinary human being. He will be an extraordinary senator for a long time if he gets reelected. We've got to focus on the issues. And the thing is, it's not just doing less bad in rural areas and pumping up your base in urban areas. As I've said on show after show after show, Areva, it's the 120 million people, mainly young people, who will not vote that will decide whether Tim Ryan or Raphael Warnock win. We've got to get young people out to vote by focusing on the issues and saying, hey, Raphael Warnock, if we lose Raphael Warnock, we need 3 more. If we win with Raphael Warnock, we need 2 more. If we win with Tim Ryan, we need 1 more. And then all we need to do is pick up Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and we're good. And because people don't understand how the system works and how their vote is incredibly important to them getting what they want.
Yeah. Katie, law and order. A lot of talk about, 2 years ago, we were talking about reforming police, moving their budget to human and health and human services. Then we saw this spike, or at least, some parts of the country, there were spikes in crime. And then we went back to this kind of, tough on crime. Law and order became the language again that we were using, even though we kind of moved away from that. How is that law and order theme resonating in suburbs like where you are in Ohio?
I think it's hard to take a party seriously that talks about law and order and being tough on crime that won't even admit to what happened on January 6th being a crime. That's an issue. That is not a mainstream position to take. But I also think that both parties should be talking absolutely about crime problems across the United States. I'm tired of the same old, supposed solutions we've been hearing about since the 90s being proposed again and again. I want a more comprehensive community-based solution that addresses the root of these problems so that we can actually move past them rather than doing the same thing over and over and over again. But look, yes, we're hearing about it in the suburbs for sure. Nobody wants to feel unsafe in their communities. I think that there's a lot of things complicating this issue for Republicans. If you see, again, going back to this issue of gun violence, this is the number one cause now of death for children across the United States. If they're doing nothing to address that, if they refuse to hold their own party accountable for a crime committed at the US Capitol, they're not going to have a lot of credibility on this issue.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Dr. Carter, what we're hearing and what we know to be true is because of gerrymandering, that Republicans running for office, they don't care what their constituents want. So if 90% of their constituents want universal background checks, want to ban assault weapons, it doesn't matter because they're not running in these now Republican districts that they've created. They're running for the primary. Because if they draw an extremist in their primary, they are fearful that they won't make it out of that primary. Because if they can get out the primary, they know they're going to win the general because the districts have already been drawn in a way that it's secure for them. So you have this small percentage of the electorate holding hostage what might otherwise be a pretty reasonable conservative candidate. They have to move so far, like J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance was critical of Donald Trump. But to get out of that primary, he then became the biggest Trump lover ever. How do we fix that? And our system is broken. And that's what we're hearing from these Republican senators now is they really kind of believe that we should do something about assault weapons, but they're so afraid that they're going to draw some extremists and they'll get, primaried and they won't get out of that primary.
Well, I would say, I think what they're really concerned is
their constituents want.
I think they're really concerned they're going to lose power. And I think that's a little bit different than just drawing in extremists. And the fact is, extremists don't win unless people vote for them. And this is something that Richard said earlier that I actually do agree with. This is why civic education is really important in this country, because many times people want to think about the general election, but by the time we get to the general election, it's too late. The candidate that you would most prefer, the candidate you like, is not even in the running anymore because you didn't show up in that first round of elections to actually pick that person to be your candidate. So we heard a lot of crowing about this in 2020, right? People like, oh, I'm not excited about Joe Biden. It's like, but when you could have voted in your primary, you chose not to. Now, granted, we know the primary system is flawed, and especially at the national level, but even at the state and local levels, when we talk about the sort of two-tiered election system we have, we don't really think about the fact that people do experience election fatigue. Primaries are usually the most faithful partisans. That's who shows up. And they get the choice, right, of the candidate for the general election. But they're not the same people that show up in general elections. And I think we have to do a much better job of keeping people engaged throughout the election cycle. We talk about the big show because that's the sexy one, right? But we have to talk about these primary elections because that's when you sort of, pick your person, so to speak, to do this long-term race. And we don't really think about Americans as being tired of elections, but we vote a lot in this country, a lot. We vote in primaries, we vote in generals, we vote in off years, right? We have these state and then we have these federal elections. So people are actually in this cycle a lot. And we assume that, again, that everybody has the ability to engage, that people want to engage, that this is something that people feel excited by or drawn into. And that's not the case. And we don't do a good job of talking to young people. We don't do a good job of talking to low propensity voters, right? We don't do a good job of reaching people where they are. And because election days are not holidays in this country and all kinds of things, there are lots of roadblocks set to get people active and engaged. And the primaries are just one example of that. I think a lot of people forget or don't even know that primaries are happening until the lead up, right? Because it's like, oh, it's another election. It's a thing. And then world is happening, right? Life is doing its thing too at the same time. I mean, we were talking about Buffalo. just a week and some change ago. And there were primaries happening in the midst of all this and gearing up for primaries in the midst of all of this. I mean, it's a lot happening for people.
No, I totally agree with you. We can't, I mean, we're grieving Buffalo and then Texas happens. And yesterday was the second anniversary of George Floyd.
George Floyd, yes.
Focused on that executive order. And in some ways, it even seemed out of place for the president to be doing it because these 19 kids were dead. Mm-hmm. Richard, I know your approach to this is the numbers. But if you were talking to Democrats who are now coming up on their races, had a horrific shooting, how would you tell them to message around the Republicans who are saying we won't even consider universal background checks, even though they're supported by, some polls say, 90% of the U.S. populace?
Yeah, I honestly think it's pretty simple. And that is to replace the stupid, meaningless, demotivating name, the midterms, with what these midterms are really about. It's kind of a Frank Luntzification of, Democratic approach. For example, I'm saying it's are you voting in the gun violence prevention elections of 2022? Or are you voting in the women's reproductive choice elections of 2022? Or are you voting in the climate emergency elections of 2022? Or my favorite one, because the House already passed this bill, we talked about it, decriminalizing marijuana nationally and expunging criminal records for people who were caught up in this stupid war on drugs. Are you voting in the marijuana midterms, right? So if we focus on the things that actually are on the ballot, I think that puts a super fine point on the fact that Republicans, they can jump up and down, they can do whatever they want. They do not represent the will of any majority anywhere on these issues. And therefore, as long as people know it, especially young people, they'll vote. And the thing about motivation, if you're giving away free dinners, free pizzas, free tennis shoes, people are going to line up around the block and even sleep out there the night before. We just have to make the demand realistic in terms of what is at stake, because it's way more important than a pizza or a pair of tennis shoes.
Yeah, it's funny that you tell that story. Someone told me that in one of the last presidential elections for Barack, that the turnout, Philadelphia politicians were concerned because the party hadn't put enough money on the streets for those pizzas. And they were like, look, we can turn these people out, but we need that money for this food. Kind of that old school, party politics.
I went down to Alabama during the Doug Jones special election to Selma with $5,000 worth of catfish and fried chicken.
Yeah, no, okay. Katie, what do you think about how Republicans are approaching the midterms? I had a guest on the show yesterday, and she said that Republicans, in a very charismatic and persuasive way, are saying to voters, look, the country is screwed up. Gas prices are high. Your grocery prices are high. Your kids are getting killed in schools, blah, blah, blah. And it's because of those Democrats. And if you give us a chance, if you just give us a chance, we can fix it. And she said that sounded good to a lot of people. And it was persuading a lot of people. And what I said to her was, my God, you got to check the record. Are these the same Republicans you're talking about that, wouldn't even vote for Ketanji Brown Jackson to go to the Supreme Court? Like, shouldn't people be checking the records of these people? And she, I think what she was saying was that people are easily persuaded by, this sweet talk from Republicans. How do you combat that?
I'll take that strategy all day, honestly. I mean, if that's all they've got, and they do like to do that because they don't have much to offer themselves. They malign the other side. They're really, really good at that. They're great at telling big stories, scary stories that get, those parts of our brain going and activate fear. And so if you got nothing, you drive up those emotions against the other side. You create the boogeymen, the things that aren't even real, that are not based on truth. And that becomes your strategy. We need to be well aware of exactly what's going on. I get concerned when I think this is easy to combat, frankly, because I think that if you do raise the stakes, make it very clear, like Richard was saying, what exactly is on the line, and you see that there is a choice, that it's not just nothing versus fear. If you see that there actually is a choice here, I think that people are capable of making good choices. What I get concerned about sometimes is that then when we do hear this fear mongering and everything they do, sometimes Democrats get uncomfortable and they run the other way and they don't want to have the conversation, and then they look weak. And that plays into other stereotypes that Republicans are successful in describing of Democrats. So I want to see Democrats stand up, call out this extremism, ask them how they're going to solve these very hard problems. They don't have answers. That's their whole point. They don't want to govern. They don't want to do the work. They want government to fail the American people. So bring it on, but Democrats need to be smart about it. We can handle that strategy all day long.
Yeah, we saw that Michigan state senator when she responded to that woman. What did the
Mallory McMorrow?
Yes, Mallory became an instant Democratic star because she stood up, as you said, and took on that Republican criticism.
We need more Mallorys, Areva. In fact, we are having at Red, White, and Blue a nationwide suburban mom mobilization coming up on June 6th. That Mallory McMorrow will be headlining. And, the whole point is to recognize that all we do have on the line in this next election cycle, and to hold her up is that role model. And our intention is to get thousands of women to sign on, commit to talking to the other people in their community to make sure that they turn out and they understand what's on the line.
Wow, that is awesome. I'm glad to hear that. And I'm so glad to see that you guys have expanded, Katie, well beyond Ohio, and that you're
yes, ma'am.
Because we need you in those races that Richard is talking about: North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Georgia. Dr. Carter, I saw a headline that said Stacey Abrams may be in trouble in Georgia.
We have to remember, Georgia is still a deep red state. I mean, what we saw with Warnock, for example, he only beat Kelly Loeffler by 2 points. So, it was going to be tight. Georgia is in play. But Georgia is still a deep red state. And I think even though, Abrams has sort of come to the fore and become this sort of national hero, if you will, and certainly a national personality, she still has to run in the state of Georgia. And there are lots of places that are not Atlanta, that are not Macon, right? Albany and all these little small kind of towns that make up that state. And, we remember when Harold Ford, for example, right, was running for Senate in Tennessee, he was doing pretty good with white voters in suburban and some urban places, but it was those rural voters that really sort of undid his campaign. And I think the same thing with Stacey Abrams. I definitely think the New Georgia Project and others have been doing a great job of reaching out to youth voters, reaching out to African-American voters in particular in that state. So they're doing a lot of work, and they're doing get out the vote campaigns. That's the way that Warnock was able to win previously. And we saw Stacey Abrams get very close previously. But we still are talking about a deep red state that has put up a lot of roadblocks to Black folks voting in that state. And that's going to be a large part of that base, but it's also going to take, liberal white folks, maybe even moderate folks to show up for Abrams in that general election. But if she wins, it's going to be tight. I don't think it's going to be a blowout by any stretch. It's going to be tight.
Katie, I think your suburban project is going to have to expand into rural America. We're going to need you ladies not just talking to your suburban peers, but we need you to go into those rural communities. Richard, last question for you. Are we, Democrats, particularly African-American and minority Democrats, we get sick of the Democratic Party focusing on, those moderate Dems, those white Dems, and we say, just turn out the hardcore base that's there. Are we making a mistake trying to go after those moderate Republicans, those never Trumpers? Is there any voter that is really up for grabs in these elections, or are we all just right? Either you're with the Democrats or you're with the Republicans, because we hear about these independents, and I have my doubts about whether there are any even left.
So if we focus on the issues that we've been talking about, right? Reproductive choice, gun violence, climate change, voting rights, police reform. It's a binary choice. And the truth is, all of the issues that the Democratic Party has to offer America are issues that the country agrees with Democrats on, right? Overwhelming majority of people want what Democrats only can provide. And I think it's wasted breath to talk to Trump Republicans or Christian evangelical Republicans. But what we need to be doing, and I keep saying this over and over and over again, is focus on the low propensity and non-voters, the 120 million Americans who mostly are young people or people of color who share Democratic Party values, who will not vote. That's where the gold is. That's where the victories are. And I think we can turn almost every possible election around if we do that.
All right, we've got to leave it there. Thank you so much, Richard. Again, Dr. Carter is the author of American, While Black, African Americans, Immigration and the Limits of Citizenship. We got that book up. Katie, good luck with that national event. And, red, wine, and blue, keep talking to those suburban women. We definitely need you, and hoping that you can pull Tim Ryan over the finish line in Ohio. That would just be phenomenal. Richard, I want you to call the party and set up that meeting with Fetterman and those black pastors. Okay, that's your assignment. Get that done so we can turn those black voters out in Philly and we can get John elected, because we do need him. We cannot lose that seat. And Dr. Carter, you call Richard and convince him. So everybody has some homework. Thank you, guys. Always good to
see you. I'm on it.
All right. I want to thank all of my guests this morning. I'm laughing now because I love these guests and they're always so insightful and help us understand why these elections are so important. And I think one thing we can all take away from this is we know anyone that's not voting, that's not registered to vote, we all have an obligation to talk to them. And Richard gave us some great ways to talk about it. This is the marijuana legalization election. So what young person doesn't want, weed to be legal all over this country? And if you're talking to women, this is the reproductive rights election. And there's something that's going to touch everyone. We just have to, know what our audience is and make sure we're speaking to them where they are. But we all have an obligation to make sure that we elect people who are going to protect our rights to vote, our rights to control our own bodies, and our rights, most importantly, for our kids to be able to go to school safely. Republicans talk about the constitutional right of gun owners. What about the rights that we all have, particularly our kids, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And you can't pursue happiness if you're dead. So get out there and make sure you're encouraging someone to vote. Be safe out there. Remember, we're all in this together.